Iowa Catholic Radio brings you an encore presentation of Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.
Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Welcome to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. I'm Jean Till, and on today's show, we're visiting with Zena Hitz, founder and president of the Catherine Project and author of Lost in Thought, The Hidden Pleasures of an Intellectual Life.
Among several of her works.
Yes.
So we'll be looking forward to bring her on early here in a moment. But here we are in the octave of Easter,
yes.
The great 8 days, and anticipating Divine Mercy Sunday as well. So many of our parishes have marvelous celebrations. Of course, Christ the King in the Des Moines Metro is always the host for the major Divine Mercy, and the priests generous in offering the sacrament of confession. We know the graces that flow, St. Faustina and all that's part of that. But in this year, also kind of following immediately as the Feast of the Annunciation was displaced a little bit. So that'll be on the Monday right after Divine Mercy Sunday. Also the day of the total eclipse. As I've been
that's appropriate.
I need to, make sure I have my glasses ready, right? Because I am going to venture with my nephew and niece to go to the path of fatality.
So where are you going to see?
To an undisclosed location, right?
Okay,
So people say, the bishop's got a hard life. Where does he? But Bishop Malesic in Cleveland is actually going to host us. So
cool.
Very generous of him. So it's a whirlwind 24-hour excursion. But that's only following on the heels of being at St. Mary in Shenandoah, joining with the St. Mary Hamburg Parish for the initial confirmation, as Bishop Connolly and Lincoln would say, hitting the old Chrism Trail here as the confirmation excursion begins. Tomorrow we'll be at St. Bernard in Osceola with the good people there. Next week, St. Theresa in Des Moines and St. Pius in Urbandale. Amidst a list of several, but we won't go through the whole roster. But what great engagement with our young people. Always like to meet with them an hour beforehand and that. And I think this mystery of the Annunciation, I think, can characterize maybe where they're at as well. And Mary, as Father Donald Haggerty, whom I've been quoting frequently lately, but that Mary is priming us. She desires souls, especially when we realize our poverty, our need. And maybe we'll talk with Professor Hitz a little bit about how she characterizes Mary in a way that isn't always the familiar profile that is painted of her. So, but that she's stirring us even before we maybe even are conscious of it, to give our own fiat, to give ourselves completely over. We all long to give ourselves away, and I think these young people, maybe they're in touch with that, maybe not, but the Holy Spirit, I think, can prompt them and urge them in a very powerful and compelling way. So looking forward to the darkening, but only so that the light, which will not be diminished, can overcome all the darkness in the world. And I think Professor Hitz, as we bring her into the mix here, and so grateful to have you with us today, Professor Zena Hitz. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and I was fortunate to hear you on the left coast, but you actually are on the right coast, in Annapolis, Maryland, at St. John's, famous for its great books program. Your formal appointment, as you kind of identify yourself, is as a tutor, but that's what we would typically associate as a professor and teacher. Is that correct?
That's right, yes. All
right, and the Great Books program. So that's a little bit different approach than maybe the standard undergraduate curriculum. Is that true?
Yes. We read, our sources are almost all original sources, great books, and our classes are conducted by conversation rather than by lecture.
Yeah. Does that take a little bit of trust? I mean, it takes a certain skill, right? I mean, to kind of midwife, as some of the ancient philosophers would say, people. But, do you have a sense each class meeting that where this is going, or is that part of the excitement and the anxiety that, this is taking on a life of its own?
It is a major act of trust, but in a way that's similar to in the life of faith. Right? You make these acts of trust. You trust that the conversation will get to something substantive. You trust that the student writing their essay is going to have an insight. And it just ends up happening every time. So your confidence is increased with experience. Okay. But it is hard to let go. It's hard to let go of control of your own classroom and let things work out their own way.
Yeah, well, and so there's a kind of natural act of faith, but you are a woman of faith as well, and we look forward to hearing a little bit of your own life trajectory. And hopefully, Jean, as one of the great people of St. Patrick's Walnut, when I was celebrating the 150th, she said, I can just tell, Bishop, when you write your mirror columns, there's that philosopher going at it again. So I don't think that was a compliment, but here we go. So, all right, so we better break.
We better break. We are going to take a quick break, and when we return, we will be visiting with Zena Hitz, founder and president of the Catherine Project and author of Lost in Thought, The Hidden Pleasures of an Intellectual Life. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen on Iowa Catholic Radio and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network.
Iowa Catholic Radio brings you an encore presentation of Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen.
Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen, and on today's show we're visiting with Zena Hitz, founder and president of the Catherine Project and author of Lost in Thought, The Hidden Pleasures of an Intellectual Life.
Thank you again, Professor Hitz, and if I may refer to you as Zena. I'm intrigued, in your book, Lost in Thought, but you also have done some exploration of the whole theme of vocation among religious as well, and so there's a kind of a Catholic spirit, I think, animating some of what you're about. But your own life story and the trajectory of it, your kind of existential crisis while you were in graduate studies, and then this became a kind of opening to faith. Could you just share with us a little bit of how this all kind of unfolded?
Sure. So I grew up in really quite secular environment. I have a Jewish background through my mother, but we never practiced anything, any religion. In fact, I think all four of my grandparents were atheists. As astonishing as that sounded, I think it's true. So anyway, I didn't have religion. I found myself after college, actually during college, attracted to religious people. I wanted to be around them, and my closest friends ended up being religious. That happened to me again in graduate school, and so there was one part of me that was thinking, as I was getting older and becoming more of an adult and trying to take my life more seriously, I thought, well, there's got to be something in this religion thing, or I wouldn't like these people so much. But that's not the story I tell in the book. The story I tell in the book was that so at the same time, that's the religion part of the story. I grew up my family was also a family of bookworms. No one was a professional academic or anything like that, but we like to read and we like to argue. And so,
sounds like my family. All right.
Oh no, it's delightful. Yeah, one of the things I complain about is the smartphones have ruined good argument. You want to just argue about a matter of fact. It gets ruined if someone can look up the answer. So we grew up in reading and arguing, and so it was very natural for me to go to liberal arts college. I went to St. John's, where I teach now, and then I ended up going in very competitive graduate programs where on one hand, it was wonderful. It was very privileged. I learned a lot from very accomplished people. But there's a real spirit of competition, intense competition in those environments. And I was sucked into it as I was a young person, sort of looking for an identity and looking for a way of life. So I think most of us when we're young are susceptible to wanting to be a part of some kind of elite group, and the quickest way to do that is to despise everyone else, and gossip about them. So anyway, that was what I did for a time, and it started to wear on me, and I started to feel, as the more time went on, a greater and greater tension between that original bookwormish love of learning for its own sake and this kind of highly professional, competitive practice that I was doing in graduate school, where everything mattered was, it was impressing the right people and getting the best job and, climbing this ladder of prestige.
Kind of a pyramid scheme of sorts, well, who's going to come out on top at the end? Who's
going to come out on top? And the academics are very, very adept at making very small distinctions so that you can, there's always a status distinction no matter what you're doing. I had one of the big moments that was transformative for me was I was a graduate student in Princeton at the time when the World Trade Center was bombed. And it had a very profound emotional impact on me, as I thought, I felt like I'd been living in this kind of luxurious bubble, and suddenly the realm of human suffering sort of opened up in front of me. And so I thought, well, I have to live in some way that acknowledges this suffering. And that began a kind of existential crisis because... And it fed into the difficulty I was having with the competitive aspects of what I was doing. But I wanted a life that was going to be responding to the deepest realities, which are, among other things, suffering and death and sacrifice and love. And it was very hard for me to see that. So that started me. That crisis took many years, truthfully, to fully unfold and to resolve itself. And
were you kind of going it alone, or did you have a mentor or someone who maybe was not a person of faith, but at least could acknowledge the spiritual rumblings of all of this and the kind of existential, ultimate, discernment or reflection that you were carrying out at this time?
I have to say it really was it was in many ways something that was happening to me on my own, or between me and God, I would say now. But I did have friends who were religious, so I had some reinforcement, some support for the sense that it was going in a religious direction. But no, I honestly, I think is the nature of an existential crisis, is that you can really be kind of launched into the depth of things, and it can be very hard to find people who really can help navigate it. And in a way that makes sense, because each person, I think these crises are really, they're invitations from God to live one's life at a deeper level. And each person does that in their own way. There's something very individual about the life of faith. In the long term, I did. Once I became Catholic, which I did, and once
You found a decent priest somewhere in there?
Yes, I did, exactly. So once I became Catholic, that was a big help, because then, you could talk to a priest, you could get something called a spiritual director. I got a spiritual director. So there were resources that I could then turn to, and people could say, well, it sounds like you're discerning something. I'd be like, oh, okay, what's discernment? Let's read some books about that. So I did. The church really helped me to navigate it. But at the beginning, it was me on my lonesome, trying to wrestle with the deepest parts of life. It was intense.
So the life of the mind was not inherently inimical or opposed to your spiritual life, but the way in which the kind of subculture of academia was there, and you kind of referred to that at one point. We say the intellectual life is not a refuge from competition, but a more or less devious form of that. You say at one point in your book, but then I'm sensing that your friends who had faith were not putting a hard press on you either. There was a kind of respectful, allowing and trusting the Spirit for you, and so they weren't proselytizing you or get thee into a church at the same time.
Oh no! I mean, like many people who study philosophy, I'm a terrible contrarian. So if anyone had come after me, trying to really persuade me to do it, I think it would have it would have worked in the opposite direction. They were very gentle, and I think just to go back to what you were saying about so to me, it felt at that time the crisis came to me as the life of the mind and a good life, a life of faith, a life of love, a life of service. These things are somehow opposed to one another. And what I discovered through, a series of intense experiences, including some time in a religious community, what I discovered is that they're not really in tension at all, and that the life of the mind can be, in fact, a form of loving service. So but that took some time for it to work it all out. So I wanted to, and that was such a formative experience for me to suddenly see why the life of the mind could be a way of loving service, a way of a life of faith, that I felt like I had to write about it. And sure enough, it turns out all kinds of people have very similar struggles. Lots of people who pursue the life of the mind, it feels selfish, it feels narrow, it feels disconnected. And sometimes that's true, but it's not because of the life of the mind. Life of the mind in itself is something holy and good, but it takes some work to recover that for oneself.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think you're speaking to my heart, but I think that's something you say, it might be more elusive now as we become absorbed in social media and that. And I think that's really one of the main theses of your book, really, to kind of open us up to this and to delve into that. I mean, it's a tour de force of a rather unique set of characters that you touch on. I mean, everyone from Steve Martin, the famous comedian, his becoming a philosophy major, birdwatcher John Baker, Einstein, Malcolm X, King David and John the Cross, Dorothy Day. So these are all people that become companions for you along this journey that you're undertaking, and the ones that you invite to your students to invite them into their lives as well?
That's right. It's an eclectic bunch in part because I wanted the book to be an account of my personal journey and my personal companions. That is, it's not a canonical reading list. It's not like if you haven't watched this film called The Hedgehog, you're not an educated person. That's not true. But it's meant to illustrate the way that different things I read, different things I saw, different experiences I had showed themselves as helpful to me in pursuing these questions.
Wow.
And also to give readers something to do if they were interested by something, they can go read something else. Kind of a recommendation list.
For which you receive no compensation or any gratuity or anything else.
No. It's not product placement. Yeah. It's just heartfelt recommendation.
I'll confess my nerdiness, but Muriel Barberry's novel, The Elegance of the Hedgehog, I was so taken with it. I was citing it in class, but I was also buying copies for my niece and confirmation, particularly young women, to give that to them, but the movie version as well. And you unfold for us some key features of this life of the mind. I don't want this to sound something erudite or remote, lofty, up in the clouds. Is this a solitary endeavor? Is it social, communal? I mean, we're going to find that we've got friends along the way, or how would you characterize it?
Well, I think it's something that sometimes is confusing in the way I put it to the book, because I emphasize, in many ways, the isolation of it. So, the main character of The Hedgehog is a concierge in an apartment building. She has a secret room behind her apartment where she reads and thinks by herself.
So it's not a Met lab; it's a mystery lab.
No, it's a secret library. So she has a secret life, a hidden life, and that, to me, there's something I think very fundamental about that. So each person has their own inner life. Just as each person has their own relationship with God, each person has their own life of the mind, their own questions, their own unique experiences. That said, I think, at least the way I think about it, I characterize intellectual life as withdrawal from the world, but that's leaving behind the realm of competition and finding one in a space where you open-ended leisure, where you're pursuing questions and thoughts for their own sake. But that withdrawal is a path to greater engagement and greater community. So if you're engaging with people at the realm of competition, that's not really human connection at its deepest level. So you have to withdraw from that, find some things in your own inner life, and then you have something to connect with others at a deeper level. So that's what I call the communion, right? So Renee, the concierge of the Parisian apartment building, she has this secret place, but then that attracts other people to her, and it turns out other people read books, other people want to talk about ideas, and they find their way to her. And then she has these very profound friendships, which are not based on competition, but which are based on, a recognition of dignity and a recognition of some of the deepest questions of a human life. So it's a mixture. It's dynamic between the necessary wrestling each person has to do with themselves and all of the friendship and help and that's along the way, and then this communion that's possible at the end of it. And
that I think meshes very well with your kind of drawing from Aristotle, a little bit with Plato, but in his ethics, kind of talking about what is the ultimate human end, and how is friendship ingredient to this? That when we're having conversations, we're not like cattle grazing or just
right.
chowing down a pizza together. That there's something happening that is beautiful and transcends time in that moment. We're kind of taken to a new realm in that way. And I think if we've ever had privilege to have those kind of conversations, that it's a kind of foretaste of eternity.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It seems like it can go on indefinitely, and it's a human activity that's shared in a very deep way. Like you say, it's not just everyone eating some pizza in the same place. exchanging ideas. It's seeing into the depths of things, and we do that best, I think, with other people. But it takes special circumstances and sort of principled commitment to seeing what's possible.
Which is that ascetic or disciplined dimension, right?
Yeah,
and you talk
that's
about
right.
St. John
That's
the Cross
right.
and King David
That's right.
extolling that in that way, that then we become capable of that. So, Jean, here we are. We're approaching another break. I feel like we're kind of at foretaste of eternity here. Time is going so quickly. All right.
It is going quickly.
Well, stay with us as we continue our conversation with Zena Hitz, founder and president of the Catherine Project, and author of Lost in Thought, The Hidden Pleasures of an Intellectual Mind. And to find out about the Catherine Project, go online to catherineproject.org. That's Catherine with a C. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen on Iowa Catholic Radio and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network.
Iowa Catholic Radio brings you an encore presentation of Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen.
Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen.
So pleased to have Zena Hitz with us.
Yes.
And, the Catherine Project is a kind of labor of love for you. I think of my time and studies in Washington, D.C. I spoke to the St. Catherine of Alexandria Society of Young Professional Women. So what does your project entail?
Well, the book Lost in Thought makes this argument that the life of the mind is for everyone. And what happened after the book came out is I got a lot of emails from people who wanted to know how to start, if they wanted to get in touch with Life of the Mind, if they wanted to live a life of study, if they wanted to read some of these books. So the Catherine Project is a open online community for adult learners. It's free of cost, and we have small, high-quality conversation groups on great books. So I invite anyone who's listening to check us out and feel free to sign up and see whether it's for you.
Marvelous. So, and as you say, people who may have no religious faith, atheists, or people who might have a Christian orientation or whatever.
That's right, and that said, it's not combative. It's a mix of people, but we don't, it's not, the edges are not sharp.
Civility prevails. Oh my goodness, this is such a prophetic act here.
I know.
Our U.S. bishops and their Civilize It project, is an election season. I will not digress there, but you make a distinction between an orientation of love of learning and the love of spectacle. And, Plato is lurking in the background here, the lovers of sights and sounds. And both they manifest a kind of restlessness that might be there. I think even Pope Francis has commented, Thomas à Kempis, don't be just kind of a voyeur, a kind of spiritual tourist through life, which might be more related to the spectacle. But, tonight, as the show airs on April 6th, Final Four, March Madness. Are you against March Madness, Zena?
First of all, I think the worst spectacles, the kind of spectacle that's the most toxic and useless, is the kind where it's not even human excellence you're interested in. It's something like catastrophe. So for me, the key example that's commonest to me, I don't know about Iowa's a healthier place than the places I live, but it's people who are obsessed with bad news. They really want the bad news. They're always scrolling for the bad news. So March Madness is a display of human excellence, human achievement. I mean, sports is not the worst thing. That said, if your pursuit of watching sports is interfering with things that matter more, like taking care of your family or doing what you're supposed to be doing, or drawing you away from if you're
worshiping God on occasion.
If you're not going to mass because you're watching games. I mean, so you want to have an orientation that's solid. You want to have one thing in your life that is the most important, and that's pulling all the strings. That leaves some space for things which are entertaining or lesser goods or what have you. So no, I'm not against March Madness, but don't let it take over your life. You've got to make sure that you're headed in the right direction.
Okay, so not quite damning with faint praise, but no, the March Madness, but no. And
I know it doesn't feel that way. I know it doesn't feel like the least important thing, but it isn't as important as other things.
Yeah. So we have a quick 45 seconds here, and I just again, it's not a elitist, insular thing, but how this flows. Then, if we do allow ourselves, our communion with others, not only in ideas but in service and the loving service that you perform with your young people, and you don't, I feel like your book is an exercise in the Catholic intellectual tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition, but how is this then going to allow us to love our neighbor and lay down our lives for our neighbor? You've only got 20 seconds. Sorry.
Piece of cake.
Well, think about the love of learning, the need to learn. It's a human need. It's like, food and shelter they're more fundamental. You can't learn if you don't have food and shelter. But allowing people to learn, creating spaces for them to learn, is a way of loving them. It's a way of serving them, and that's why you can revere your teachers. You can treasure your time in school as a time when you were loved and served, and pass it on to others.
Oh. Dorothy Day would be smiling, I think, and she gets good mention to her. So thank you so much, Zena Hitz. God blessings in your vocational calling to serve young people and awaken us and even your adult learning community, the Catherine Project.
Okay, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
This has been another edition of Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. Thank you to our guests and to all of our listeners in Iowa, Nebraska, and Wisconsin, or wherever you may be listening to Iowa Catholic Radio and the Spirit Catholic Radio Network.
You can hear Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen every week on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.